What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Keeping Karlsson. I'm your host, Louis Ezekiel, and joining me tonight, my pal and yours, Jeremy Versillo. Jeremy, how are you doing this fine Thursday evening?
Doing pretty well, just watching some hockey games, and I have a 10:30 beer league game tonight, so I've got to find an excuse to stay up late.
Oh, outstanding. Our volleyball team managed to worm our way to last place, and the prize that we got was a case of beer, and the folks who had won the league were leaving with their trophies and asking us if they could trade. So I felt like we did a really nice job there. We were very competitive, and we just, the number of games we lost, you got to win a volleyball game by 2 points, right? So we had a ton of games where we lost like 26-24 and 27-25, like in, I guess you would call it extra time for a volleyball match. So we really did our job effectively so that we could score ourselves a delicious case of Kalamazoo's own Bell's beer. So that was a good strategy, I thought. As long as you're making, the true champions jealous, I think you're doing a good job. All right. Well, we'll jump right into things here before the temperature plunges too much. We've been enjoying some unseasonable weather, but it's getting cold out there now. Speaking of the potential for getting cold, we're going to head over to Vancouver to start our headlines this evening. Jeremy, we've got kind of an interesting line change here with a recent addition playing over in Vancouver. What's going on?
Well, Elias Lindholm is off of the top power play unit, which, isn't great, but he's still playing with Elias Pettersson on even strength, as far as I'm aware. The game hasn't started today, and looking at his minutes and his production, he actually wasn't really doing anything with the power play time, so maybe a bit of a reset or some work on power play 2 can get him back in order. I'm not too worried about it, are you?
We saw that early success, I think. Actually, both he and Kuzmenko really were successful early on with their new teams on the power play. No, I'm not too concerned. I mean, of course, I would like to have him out there. But, as long as he's got that even strength deployment, there's no reason that anybody should be looking to make a change. The guy who's getting the bonus here is likely already owned in your league, but Filip Hronek will be up on that top power play along with Quinn Hughes and the usual suspects with JT Miller, Brock Besser, and Elias Pettersson. So, more or less business as usual, just with that one switch out. Short-term boon probably for those Hronek owners, and a bit of a cutback on Lindholm, but I wouldn't be surprised to see things get back to usual soon, but it'll be interesting to watch. If that power play is successful tonight, it might buy them a few more games of that configuration. We also want to make sure we give some credit to Brian, who made a nice call about Jack Roslovic. Roslovic picked up 2 secondary assists on Wednesday to bring him up to 5 points in the last 4 games. I don't love the power play 2 deployment. But playing with Jenner and Gaudreau has been nice for Roslovic, and that line was easily Columbus's best in terms of controlling play and taking shot attempts. That line was Columbus's best in terms of controlling the puck and getting shot attempts against the Ducks. Maybe not the most reliable results, since the Ducks are not great, and a team like Columbus is even capable of feasting on such a team. But nice call, certainly, on Roslovic, and a guy I would be interested in as long as he's going to be up on that Jenner and Gaudreau line. And if you buy into game score, those 3 players playing together had some of the best overall, like top 10 game scores for the season for Columbus, all occurring in the same game. So that usually is a pretty good sign overall. Finally, our last headline of the day, I want to toss to you here. We've got these Carolina goalies. We've got an interesting situation. Tell us a little bit about what's going on over in Carolina in the blue paint.
Well, with Frederik Andersen injures, Pyotr Kochetkov had been playing the majority of the starts, and then they grabbed Spencer Martin off of waivers to replace the injured Antti Raanta, and Martin had 2 pretty good starts recently. I forget exactly what the lines were, but he played well enough in the first one to get a second one. They won that game again, but went back to Kochetkov today. But also Frederik Andersen has been practicing with the team in the starter's crease a number of times, and seems like he is, at the very least, pretty close to a stint in the minors to recover from this injury. I forget what they call it. If not just jumping into a game. So we may be running into another one of those 3 goalie situations really soon here. I have both dropped and added and dropped again and added again Kochetkov in the last week and a half. So I'm just wondering, is there anything actionable here, or do you just keep your eye on the call-ups and send-downs and pick up the Carolina goalie who happens to be starting that night?
Well, so the way I look at it, I suppose, is that I don't have a ton of faith in Spencer Martin, even though he's been good lately. I don't have a ton of faith in Freddie Andersen staying healthy. And so that leaves us with Kochetkov as kind of the player that I'm most interested in. I understand, obviously, the streak with Martin, but I don't know. I just have never felt like he was all that likely to take over for any extended period of time. We know that goalies can play well in the Carolina system, although we also know for fantasy purposes, they're not always facing as many shots as you would like them to. So if they let a couple in, it can be, a pretty unproductive night for them overall. I could see Freddie even potentially, he's in and out so much. It scares me to consider adding him because he could be one of those players who, re-injures himself in that game back. Yeah, I think this is not maybe the most helpful, actionable advice, but I think I would rank them in terms of guys I would want to add for a stream or to, maybe for a little extended play on my roster. I would have Kochetkov first, Martin second because of the streak, and Freddie third just because, how's he going to look when he's back? Yes, he's maybe ready to come back, but is he ready to come back and play well? Is he ready to come back and, avoid any further injury? I just think there's so many question marks about him. And I wonder too, if that's sort of how Carolina is starting to feel about it. They, made a bold strategy, a 0G situation almost in terms of picking up 2 of the most injury prone goalies in the league. And it, has been chaotic in the crease. And I don't, maybe they want to try and make a move away from that. Maybe by relying on Kochetkov as a starter and Martin as a backup. I don't know. We'll see how things progress, but I don't have a ton of faith in Freddie right now.
At the very least, I think when Freddie gets taken off IR and starts to play in games, I think it kind of kills the value of all 3 of them, similar to what we've been seeing in Montreal and what we saw in Buffalo earlier this year. I do agree that they're going to be very careful with the 30-something-year-old Frederik Andersen and not throw him right into 3 games in a row or anything, but it may just eat enough starts that none of them are worth holding.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We've talked many times throughout the season about how difficult and unrewarding it can be to hold on to goalies who are getting, a true 50-50 split, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think that can be an unpleasant way to run your lineup. So, yeah, watch those call-ups and send-downs, but I wouldn't get too attached to anybody except, Kochetkov, I think, is likely to be someone who is going to get regular starts regardless of what kind of happens with the others. But if regular starts only means every other game, you've got to gauge whether that's going to be worth it based on your roster construction and the conventions of your particular league. All right, we've got a number of injuries and outjuries. We're going to start with some that are kind of breaking here, and that is Matthew Tkachuk and Gustav Forsling, both injured in Thursday night's game and will not return. We don't have further information for you other than that. If Shams was here on the show, he would be telling us not to make him tap the sign, and that is the sign that says, do not count a player out for any significant amount of time, meaning even the next game until the team announces that they are injured. Now, we are recording the show before any sort of post-game press conference or anything like that, so we don't have that advantage, but let's take the Shams model here and not jump to any conclusions until we hear what the coaches have to say after the game. Forsling, a secondary piece, not too much of a concern. Could mean, maybe OEL gets off the cold streak that he's on if he sees a little more increased time, but not one that I think is a major mover there, the way like an Ekblad or a Montour might open up some opportunities. Obviously, Tkachuk is the big one. He's been playing outstanding, especially as of late, and if it's going to be anything that is of significant time, it'll open up a slot, but it also is, I think, probably one of those injuries that drags down the potential for everyone else who's out there. Maybe save the person who gets to step up to a new spot. Maybe that means an opportunity for Bennett, who has really, been tough to hold for quite a while. But I don't want to speculate too much, like I said.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. The only potential good thing to come out of this is whoever gets power play 1 if Tkachuk is out longer term. But overall, this is kind of just bad for fantasy, for the Panthers, and for hockey fans in general.
You hate to see it. You don't want to see something that comes out like that. Next in the list of things you hate to see, we got to talk about another player who has suffered the Sergachev Pacioretty first game back re-injury, and that is Viktor Arvidsson. We waited and waited and waited for his return. I mentioned that I was a little nervous about him. Gun shy, I believe, was the term I used, just because it was a back injury and he was out for such a significant period of time. Got some nice deployment on that line with Danault, but was not able to make it through the game. And now Kevin Weeks is telling us that Arvidsson is in a week-to-week situation unless something, unexpected happens in the near future here. So stinks, obviously. Hopefully folks who reactivated Arvidsson didn't drop anyone too good in order to be able to do so, or maybe you can run out and grab that person again, or maybe pick out one of the low-owned hot streakers that we're going to talk about in just a little bit here.
Just to clarify, it was actually Arvidsson's 4th game back. He had, in his first 3 games back, he had 12 shots and 2 assists, along with 4 blocks. He was actually looking really good out there, and then he left 17 seconds into that 4th game. It looks like he tweaked something off of the opening faceoff. Like they pinpointed a little video where you could see him wincing as he pushed off to start moving for the day. And the coach would not confirm or deny that it was related to his back injury, but it does sound like a multi-week absence here.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. 4 games is definitely not 1 game, so I shouldn't be putting him in that same category as those guys. And yeah, a nice return, but ultimately cut short, unfortunately. But yeah, thank you for catching me on that. My brain is kind of soupy right now for a variety of reasons, but that's why it's always good to have a sharp co-host with us. And I'm going to toss it over to my sharp co-host because we have another injury that we want to talk about over in Vegas, and then we'll get to start talking about some outjuries and maybe some incoming outjuries that are a little bit further down on the horizon.
Mark Stone is now week to week also with Vegas. It's kind of a nebulous week to week because apparently it's a lacerated spleen, which doesn't really have a timetable. I can kind of feel that this is going to turn into a IR cap circumvention thing in Vegas. Like, they're going to make playoffs. Stone is generally a guy who needs some rest at the end of the year. I kind of think they're going to leave Stone on IR the rest of the season, trade for someone like Gensel, and then suddenly Stone will be back the first game of the playoffs. That's mostly me speculating, but he does sound like he's out, again, probably for the rest of the regular season for fantasy, if not part of your playoffs also.
Very interesting. I like the strategic thinking there, going beyond just considering, what are the possibilities in terms of what the actual injury might be, but given the position that Vegas finds themselves in, being able to coast towards the playoffs and not have to worry necessarily about having Stone in there. Certainly they would rather have Stone healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. So yeah, that's really interesting. Not the news certainly that Stone owners want to hear, because obviously him playing in the playoffs does very little for them in terms of the fantasy season, but definitely something to look out for. And so Stone owners, you may want to be thinking about some of those longer term options here. Maybe you can find someone who you can swing a trade with, say, hey, it's week to week. You're in good position. You can make it to the playoffs. again, because we don't know necessarily that he's going to be out for the rest of the season. But if you, like Jeremy, have that concern, and I think he's made a compelling point, that might be an opportunity for you to do something. I don't want to say that it is a sinister move. It is a clever move to make the most of your assets, and no one necessarily knows what the next step is. So that could be a very effective strategy for you, especially if you are in a cutthroat league where you need to do whatever it takes to win. So I really like that insight, and I appreciate it. Let's jump over to a player much less widely owned, but still quite interesting. Scott Perunovich is making his return here on Thursday evening. Only 1% rostered across Yahoo, but in the 3 games before he left for injury, he had 3 assists, including 2 on the power play. Also saw majority power play time on ice in 2 of the 3 games, and in the 3rd, where he only saw 45%, he was still out there for over 5 minutes of power play time. So obviously that is a pretty good sign that he is getting some opportunities out there. 3 goals so far for St. Louis, but he has not factored into any of them quite yet. But he has had almost 3 minutes of power play time, and he's sitting at about 46%, so sort of where he was in that last game before he came out. I think that's a pretty interesting option if you need, especially if you're in a league like a Cats league that counts power play points. It can be tough to get those from the defensive end. So getting a guy like Perunovich who, is not widely owned and may have been dropped due to injury, especially if the person with him on their roster was in a bit of an injury bind, I think that could be pretty interesting. They're in a middle tier over the next couple weeks, 5 games, only 1 on an off night. But yeah, I like Prunes as a potential for giving you some power play points, especially, like I said, for folks in a Cats league where those power play points carry some extra weight. I like that idea. What thoughts on, any thoughts on Perunovich? Am I making too much out of a very low owned player who maybe isn't that exciting?
I'm not that excited about him. I think he's worth the streamer slot, but I wouldn't be looking to add him for a 3-game week or a longer term thing. Looks like he's playing on the 2nd power play unit and has about 10 minutes of time on ice through 2 periods tonight. So that's looking like a 15, 16-minute defenseman without any peripherals, and sure, he's got the upside for the odd power play point, or maybe after a couple games he takes over for Krug, but I'm not that excited.
Yeah, I think looking at some of these items, I do think that the time on ice is, the most worrisome aspect. If you look across the season, he gets close to 20 minutes a couple times, but never gets there. And he's got plenty of games in the 14, 15, 16 minute range. And for a defenseman, that is a worrisome number, even if they're getting the nice power play time. So yeah, I think you do want to be careful with that. Not a lot of time to get the peripherals in there. It seems like he is kind of hit or miss with blocks. He's giving you a couple in a game and then he's getting you nothing. So yeah, I can see it as a potential concern. The other thing too is that the shooting is just really not there. So as much as it might be beneficial, if you can get on some power play assists, if you're in a Cats league, it almost certainly counts shots, and he has none in the last 5 games and has yet to get one in this return game either. So there are definitely some red flags there. That's why I'm not, in on him necessarily in a points league, but maybe as an ad to steal a category or two, could potentially provide some value. All right, and then we've got a couple kind of longer out, over the horizon returns to look at here. Why don't you run us through those here before we take a quick break?
Before I run you through those, I've got some disappointing breaking news. TJ Oshie just went down with what was apparently a non-contact injury to his lower body, had to crawl off the ice and seemed to be in a lot of pain. That could be it for the TJ Oshie hype train I've been driving for the past few weeks. But to some happier news, Jack Eichel is expected to travel with Vegas on their upcoming road trip, which starts Saturday, goes all through next week, and ends the following Monday. If he's traveling with the team, that implies to me that by the end of the road trip, he could be ready to play. Hopefully that means he's only out for a couple more games. Additionally, Connor Ingram is traveling with Arizona on their road trip, and Matt Villalta got sent down, so it sounds like Ingram's going to be healthy enough to back up by Sunday when they play next, and then they have 4 games next week, so Ingram probably will get in at least their Thursday, Friday back-to-back next week. Seems like he's at the edge of his injury also.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if I can just quickly jump in with some, another player kind of on the Perunovich side of the playing time, but just kind of interesting. Oliver Kylington has goals in back-to-back games now, not getting a ton of ice time, but very exciting to see him, now that he has made his return, that he is starting to produce a little bit. He had nothing for his first, 9 games, but in the last couple, he has found some success. If you're searching for him on your Yahoo roster, just as a yearly reminder, I'd like to do this one time. That would be Oliver Kylington with a K, of course. All right, we are going to head into a quick break. On the other side, we have couple defensemen with hot and cold streaks, and then we've got a few interesting forwards as well. We'll jump right into those on the other side of this break. You're listening to Short Shifts. Welcome back to Short Shifts. Jeremy, we've got some interesting defenders here on a variety of hot and cold streaks. Let's start in the city of brotherly love. This is a guy that we've talked about a little bit before. What is the latest with Travis Sanheim?
Sanheim seems to have found a little bit of the game that made him a hot fantasy pickup early in the season. He has 2 goals, 2 assists, and 8 shots in the last 5 games, which is pretty good for a defenseman. I'm still a bit hesitant. I thought some of Sanheim's early season success was a bit of a mirage. The time on ice came down because he was getting run into the ground, and he still is not back on the top power play. They've been giving Drysdale and York and Zamula some time there. I do really like Sanheim as a player. I just think his fantasy relevance is limited to 4-game streamer weeks and the like.
Yeah, I think some of those guys you mentioned, they are maybe not as complete as Sanheim is, and so we've seen in the past that sometimes that is a situation that gets you into ultimately some unfavorable deployment because somebody has to take those tough minutes, and when you can't rely on some of those, more one-dimensional offensive defensemen, a Cam York type, then that can sometimes cost you on the scoreboard. Speaking of some high-quality offensive defensemen, Colorado, Cale Makar has been on quite a cold streak here. 0 points in the last 6 games leading up to this game against Detroit, which I believe is a 1-1 tie headed to overtime that Makar has not yet pointed in. He still has had 17 shots during those 6 games, not counting Thursday night. So the shooting is still pretty much there, nearly 3 shots a game, still getting over 4 minutes of power play time on ice every night. So it is likely just a matter of time. But while his offense has struggled a little bit, Bowen Byram has really stepped up his offensive game in the meantime. He has had 3 multi-point games in the last 4, again, not counting Thursday night. For a total of 2 goals, 4 assists, and 6 shots, and all those point types have been paired. So the games have been, 2 assists, 2 goals, 2 assists. Of course, he's only had 6 shots in there, which is not ideal. The shooting percentage is too high, but all of that success was accomplished at even strength. That usually bodes well. You want to see especially younger players finding even strength success. I am worried about Byram's ice time, just like I mentioned with some of the other defensemen, Perunovich included. He's been under 17 minutes in 2 of the 4 games during that streak and not more than 18:45 in any of those games. I do think, that makes him more reliable probably than a Perunovich or a Kylington. But that's around the lower levels of what I'm willing to accept from a defenseman on my roster, especially if I'm hoping to score some peripherals in those games where they're not going to end up being able to put up a point. You can tell me how you feel about this. I feel like Byram is a fine choice for a streamer while he's hot. But I wouldn't expect that streak to last without some changes in ice time. I think it could end pretty much any game, and then you're looking at a player who's really not doing an awful lot for you, especially if Makar turns things around and starts to be the defenseman who is producing the offense.
I'm with you. I fully expect Makar to turn things around pretty quickly. He'll turn this car around. Byram, not much of an interest
as I threaten
there.
my kids.
Yeah. Byram, not much interest there. And just one other point. Jack Johnson has a point tonight, making it 4 points in his last 3 games. That is a trap. Do not bother with Jack Johnson. I don't even know how much ice time he's getting. Yeah, like 12 and a half minutes, 15 minutes, 14:43. Yeah.
Listen, it's well known that Jack Johnson should not get involved in, the Jack Johnson scam is all encompassing. It is a scam to pick him up. His money is involved in scams. Listen, he's a good Michigan guy, but that is, I agree with you. Don't touch that hot stove. You will regret it, and ultimately will pay the price for it there. All right, we've got another hot player, and maybe the hottest simply because of the still scorching reaction that we've seen to just an absolute beauty of a goal that he scored. And I know that you've looked a little bit into how the new coach is treating Quintin Byfield over in LA. So why don't you take us through this, Jeremy?
I am starting to get really excited about Quintin Byfield. Both for the rest of this season and for longer term. I know coming out of his draft, it was he has immense talent, but he's also 6'4", and taller players often take longer to really make their mark on the league. But Byfield was always touted as potentially the highest fantasy upside of that draft class. Well, when new coach Jim Hiller took over, he apparently told Byfield that he was going to be playing more and to be ready for it. Byfield's average time on ice pre-Hiller was 15:32. After Hiller, with, I believe, 6 games, is 17:55. This is courtesy of Russell Morgan on Twitter. And in those 6 games under Hiller, he has 4 goals, 3 assists, 15 shots, 4 hits, a block, and a power play point. Kid's only 21 still. He's emerging. I'd obviously be holding him for the rest of this season, and if for some reason you can swoop in a keeper or dynasty league and buy him, I'm pretty close to all in on Byfield at this point.
Yeah, quite exciting. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where he should go next year. You love to see a coach putting a lot of confidence on him. And we've been talking about ice time a ton tonight, but we got to hit it again here. That's a really significant difference. That's like second line, third line minutes versus first line minutes. That is going to make a big difference. And I think if you can impress your coach with the kind of moves that he put on, for that recent goal, please do go check it out if you haven't seen it. That's going to, keep that confidence going. That is rewarding the coach for taking a chance on you and putting you in a position to succeed. And coaches love to feel like they made smart moves. And I think as long as he continues to reward Hiller, then he can continue to see the type of deployment that is leading to his recent success. We also got a little update here, a small cold streak on Nikolaj Ehlers, just 3 assists in the last 10 games, 25 shots still over that time, so a little bit down from his season average, but, that's not terrible. You like to see, close to 3 shots a game. But as you mentioned, when we were talking about him, we are starting to see that time on ice begin to fade again. We had seen it climb up. This is the endless cycle of frustration with Nikolaj Ehlers, a player that I think we talk about, in terms of potential and reality more than maybe anybody else. We do have some suspicion that he might be fighting a nagging injury, and that might be contributing somewhat to this time. And, we have also seen this Winnipeg team really go through some long slumps without a ton of scoring. The players, the best players on the team have not been the best players on the team lately, or at least ostensibly the best players. We have seen Shawnee Monty finding some success, which is great to see. Obviously that's very exciting to see him, in his new place and paying off for the team that picked him up. But, other than, a few of those breakout games like that 2-goal game recently, we just haven't seen as much as I think we would like to see from some of these Winnipeg players, and Ehlers is very much included. Hopefully he can pick things up as he begins to heal and as he starts, as the team overall starts to turn their offense around a little bit. But yeah, they have not been the offensively gifted, defensively impenetrable team that they spent the first, almost, 2/3 of the year. Maybe that's getting excessive, but, whatever. The first 3/5 of the year, kind of earning that mantle, as a team that was really scoring a ton. You didn't want to play your goalie against them. And if you had one of those goalies, you were feeling great about it just about every time, has faded somewhat here.
With regards to the nagging injury, that isn't just us speculating. Scott Billick on Twitter mentioned that a couple weeks ago, Ehlers suggested that his training camp ailment was something he's continued to deal with on and off for the whole season, which could explain some of the streakiness we've seen. And he's expected to play tomorrow still, so it's not enough to keep him out of the lineup, but lots of maintenance days and some rest is needed.
Yep, absolutely. All right, and then you had some recommendations for some guys who are looking like their fortunes are turning around a little bit. Actually, they had some success even before their star player returned from injury to play with them. But why should people be looking at Nick Foligno and Philipp Kurashev?
Foligno has 4 goals and 3 assists in his last 7 games, only 13 shots, which is less than 2 per game, which is not very good. But he's also collecting about 2 hits per game and a couple of blocks. Philipp Kurashev has a goal and 7 assists in his last 8 games with 12 shots and 1 hit and 1 block, so basically nothing. Additionally, those 2 players just got reunited with Connor Bedard, and the good fortunes have continued. So I think there's maybe some hope that they can be fringe fantasy relevant, certainly not upcoming. They only play 2 games next week on Thursday and Saturday. But after that, you can keep an eye on them if they're still on the first line in Chicago. And one bonus one, Tyler Johnson is on power play 1 with the 3 aforementioned players and Seth Jones on defense. Johnson has 4 points in his last 5 games and 3 or more shots in 4 of his last 6. That's also somewhat interesting if you're in a deeper league.
Yeah, absolutely. I love thinking about Tyler Johnson. Every time we bring him up, I think about that fantasy week long ago when my buddy was talking about how great Johnson was playing, and I wanted to try to get a piece of him. So I grabbed in a keeper league, just off of waivers, the winger that was lining up with him, a guy named Nikita Kucherov. Just to get a piece of that Tyler Johnson success over in Tampa. Obviously their careers have diverged somewhat, in the time since then, but, exciting to see that he, is still capable of being productive. Those 3+ shots in 4 of the last 6. Love to see, some shooting taking place. Doesn't always happen in Chicago. We've had some of those periods where they've only managed a shot or 2, but usually they get it going by the end of the game. I would like any of those guys, I think, over a Perunovich, but obviously there's position items to consider. And as you mentioned, their schedule is kind of crummy next week. But definitely some guys that I've got my eyes on, especially if they continue to find some success with Bedard, and later in the week next week, you might find yourself in a position where, I can get 2 games from this guy or I can get 2 games from these guys on that Thursday, Saturday. So it might not be the worst ad in the world if you've got some space on those busier days. All right. Well, Jeremy, we have hit the end of our show here this evening. I want to thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights. I thought you made some great points today, and I think people are really going to benefit from some of the things that you've recommended here. So thank you for joining us, and thank you folks who are listening to us. Thank you for joining us as well. Always appreciate your downloads, any reviews you care to leave, especially if they're positive. Only if they're positive, I know Elon would say. Please feel free to do that as we barrel towards the end of the season here. We hope that we have helped contribute to your success. And with that, I'd like to invite you to follow us on Twitter at ShortShiftsKK. Brian and Elon, of course, can be found at Keeping Karlsson. GameDayTweets.com is the best place to go to pick up all of your useful information off of Twitter. And please visit that site. The other sites we use to research our episodes at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach. And until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.